Now how about that? The grubby male wiped his brow with an equally dirty rag, dabbing at the sweat from their hike up the mountain woods. Turning to rest his rifle on a rock and adjusting his chest plate, the sun glinted on beads of sweat on his exposed shoulders, a prominent tattoo on his right bicep reading, Scab. The man spat and turned to an older, much thinner male who had now caught up to him, a few strands of greying hair sticking to the sweat on his forehead as he approached. "Well, there it is, Charlie, just like the kid said." "Still looks like it," the older man responded, still catching his breath and wiping his wiry white beard over his half-rolled sleeve. "This had better be worth the walk," grumbled Dozer, the largest of the four of them, a heavy machine gun propped over his shoulder. He in turn sat down on a large rock nearby and slipped off the sweat-soaked bandana wrapped about his forehead and puffed loudly. "Aw, come on, babe. You said we'd go hiking weeks ago, and boom, here we are. Aren't you happy?" "I'm happy," grinned a small but intense-looking female who made the remark, winking at Dozer from the one visible eye not covered by her swept purple hair, her heavy black eyeliner smeared from the heat. The four of them sat there for a little while on the rocks beneath the trees, catching their breath between swigs of water. "So, we're going in, or what?" Dozer piped up. "Yeah," Scab replied flatly, his gaze falling back on the large, dull yellow cog half peering out at them from the foliage draped down the mountainside. "Why isn't there a number on this one?" Scab added, his gaze not breaking from the large vault door in front of them. "I do not know," replied Charles, as he scratched at his bearded chin. "Never seen one without a number before." "Probably means piss off," snorted Kitty, as she swung her pack straps back over her shoulders and pulled her pipe pistol out of its holster. "That or it's just worn away," pondered Scab as he walked toward the partially open vault door, itself stuck between fully open and completely closed due to the overgrowth and fallen debris mixed with the thick roots of nearby trees which had become intertwined with its mechanism over the years. Inside the vault door was nothing but darkness, accompanied by the kind of silence you usually only hear at night time, the sort of quiet which seems to be a void all of its own, sucking all ambience into itself, a palpable, uncomfortable silence. As they stepped into the vault welcome area and pushed through the swinging yellow gates, the group clicked on their shoulder-mounted lights. Strange. What is? No boxes, clipboards, vault suits, paperwork, nothing. So, I've scouted more than a few of these places. They're all just different shades of the same thing. Entrance, security, communal area, blah blah. What's your point? Point is, where was the welcome party? There aren't any chairs or terminals here. Hell, there aren't even any clothes aside from those. Scab motioned with his rifle as the barrel-mounted light fell over an assortment of lab coats hanging on the wall and neatly stacked in an open locker. Something snapped with a gravelly echo under the heel of Scab's boot, and he swung his light down to see what it was. A pair of glasses, now broken underfoot. Scab opened his mouth to say something to the others, but before any sound came out, he stopped. "You hear that?" he whispered back over his shoulder to the others. "Yeah. Sounds like an alarm or something, way off. Is it in here or outside?" "Pretty sure it's from in here." They waited motionless in the dark for a few seconds, straining to hear anything in the deep recesses of the vault corridors, but nothing else came, just the faint warbling of the distant alarm. The crew cautiously continued on, checking corridors and clearing each open space as they stepped deeper into the vault. Each room seemed much like the previous, mostly barren aside from the folders and paperwork strewn across tables haphazardly, pens and empty containers of varying sizes strewn about over the floor, whiteboards with what looked like scientific gibberish scrawled over them. It was almost as if whoever was here didn't really care about the vault. No personality to it, no decoration, no evidence of people ever really living here. More of a workspace than a home. Then they came across a room which they couldn't enter, its sliding door closing off the path to the right, with only the left corridor open for further exploration. "You carry on. I'll see if I can get this thing open," Charles huffed as he placed a screwdriver between his teeth and knelt down beside the door control panel, setting his pack down with the light of the shoulder strap pointed toward the door. "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Split up in the dark vault so ghouls can pick us off one by one," grumbled Dozer. "Best leave it until we head back through," Scab agreed. "Nope, already working," snapped back the old man, already one screw removed from the control panel. "You go on and I'll let you know if there's anything worth holding on to in there." The old man swiveled his gaze toward the others with a half scowl, and his pupils dilated to pinpricks in the light of their torches. "Let me remind you, Mac's kid doesn't have all the time in the world here, so get to it, and I'll be with you shortly. And keep your eyes out for any papers which mention anything like his disease." Scab frowned a little and then turned. "Okay, your funeral, Charlie," as he resumed walking down the darkened corridor to the left, the alarm now notably louder in their ears as it echoed through the vault's ventilation ducts. It was around that time they began to notice something strange. As the vault layout reached a more open point, with much wider corridors and exposed piping and vents, there seemed to be a strange amount of mud and gravel littered about on the otherwise smooth floor. As the group looked around the open area, they spotted the first sign of something wrong. Wrong in a more palpable, real sense. Blood. Large, dried blood stains and spatter in more and more frequent quantity began to appear in the beams of their flashlights as they scanned the hallway. They exchanged glances in the dim light between beams and raised their weapons a little, each step becoming decidedly more deliberate and cautious. The light on Dozer's machine gun scanned over something which glinted and shone back into their eyes for a split second. They each turned their attention to it as they stepped closer. A massive set of gashes sat in front of their eyes, torn deep into the frame of a sliding door, seemingly opening the metal of the vault like some kind of crude can opener. The off-white painted frame peeled back to expose the shine of the bare metal underneath. But no blood to be seen. Not on these deep gashes, at least. Each one had sliced into the wall deeper than the width of a grown man's shoulders. "Deathclaw," Kitty whispered to Scab, tightening the grip on a pistol. Scab shook his head as he traced his finger along the jagged metal. "Bigger." His brow furrowed as he pulled his hand back to grip the barrel of his rifle, inadvertently catching the sharp metal against the edge of his hand and slicing it open, a few drops of blood falling to the floor. He frowned a little to himself in annoyance and checked his hand, pausing for a moment as something seemed to catch his attention. "Did that alarm just get louder?" "Yeah, it definitely did. We need to shut it off. There aren't any branching rooms from this corridor yet anyway. Let's move." At the same moment, Charles had managed to get the sealed door open, and an awful smell immediately wafted into his nose as the door raised. He lifted his sleeve over his nose as he picked up his light and stepped into the room. A few boxes laid in the back against the wall, and to the left, a terminal. Finally! Beside it, on the desk, lay a number of folders relating to various studies. He scanned through each of them, his face showing a little more disappointment each time he laid one aside. Nothing seemed to be what they were looking for. These were only related to various steroid treatments and an assortment of growth hormones being tested in the labs, mostly on an array of mice, rats, and moles. As he placed the fourth folder on the pile, they slid off the desk and clattered against something on the floor. He scanned his light down to the corner of the room beside the desk and was met by a pale, somewhat bloated corpse, still wearing a lab coat, eyes hazy with blood around its temple from a gunshot wound. A pistol still laid in its hand beside it, and a single spent bullet casing sat on the ground. The body hadn't begun active decay, so he couldn't have been there for long, a few days at most. Charles turned to the terminal and booted it up, and sure enough, the most recent entries were from only the past week. The titles read in order, scrolling from the topmost visible on the screen. Batch 713C, promising. Batch 44N, setback. Batches 9E, 9H, redundant. Batch 177A, breakthrough. Batch 16F, stable. Batch 177A, caution needed. Infirmary report 0119. Batch 177A, recommendation of euthanization. Infirmary reports 0120 through 0131. His eyebrows narrowed when he read the final title entry from only 4 days prior. They're all dead. He scrolled down and clicked on the entry, illuminating the room with its bright green text. 177A batch, total loss. Vault, total loss. Miriam bitten by one of the subjects. Broke out in severe reaction almost immediately. Around 10 more caught it from her and laid up in infirmary. Among them virtually anyone qualified enough to stop it spreading. Dr. Weber went to cull primary subject, but last reported out of containment and sealed door. But it breached soon after, and I can't keep track of anything after. Everyone is dead. I'm next. I can't let it get out. I probably have the sickness too. I can hear it coming. God, I can't take that sound anymore. It keeps making that awful sound. That sound. Mimicking the emergency door alarm. Charles bolted upright and grabbed his gun, running out of the room and down the hallway after the crew in the darkness. As his boots clumped as fast as they could carry him through the shadowy hallways, Scab and Kitty were crouched in the darkness in a side room with their flashlights turned off, their guns trained at the doorway in the pitch black, their eyes wide, pupils large and searching for movement in the darkness, pulses racing. Dozer had jumped down behind an overturned locker and was laying motionless in the dark, with something shadowy and massive searching the room for them, twitching, sniffing deeply at the stale air in the darkness. Fleshy, reddish-pink tendrils curled and flicked about from its face, as if clutching at the air, searching for what it couldn't see. Its massive weight heaved across the smooth floor, the only interruption coming from the abrupt clacking of its enormous claws against the ground whenever it moved. Then it bellowed out its awful sound. The alarm they had been hearing, or more accurately, the cue which this creature had been mimicking since the moment it had become able to do so. Now it had become gigantic, feasting on the infected personnel of the vault as they lay helpless in the infirmary, and those unfortunate enough to be in one of the hallways large enough for the creature to fit through. Skulls split apart, and bones shattered like eggshells in its mouth, skin flayed with the swat from its enormous paw, and the corpses of those who fell in the darkness crushed under its bloated body, only to be swallowed down when it returned along the same path, blindly seeking for more meat with its tendrils. Dozer lifted his head as the creature heaved itself past him, still sniffing at the air and snorting its rancid breath into the corridor. As he looked about aimlessly in the dark, a reflection of faint light fell over the far wall in the direction from which they had come. As it grew brighter, he realized it must be Charles coming to meet up with them. Dozer could just about make out some of the silhouette from the beast as the light grew brighter, but the creature didn't seem to respond to it, not being drawn to the brightness at all. He played a gamble and switched on his flashlight, its beam falling over the jet-black hair of the massive monster, which was heaving itself around the floor in search for its prey. His face instinctively grimaced at the sight, and he raised the barrel of his heavy gun, considering the potential folly of even pulling the trigger at all. With the thought still flying through his mind, Dozer's pause was suddenly interrupted by the clumping of boots as Charles grew ever closer, having no idea of what was awaiting him through the doorway. Going on nothing but instinct, he made the split-second pause to wait for Charles to come head-on at the creature, and as soon as he made a sound, to open fire on it from behind when it was distracted. There was no other way. He could hardly call out to tell him to stop after all. Scab and Kitty seemingly knew what Dozer was fixing to do, as they could now make out his outline from the reflections of Charles' flashlight as they scattered to and fro around the room. The two of them raised their weapons and quietly slipped out of the room to stand at different vantage points and all open fire on the beast at once. Their scouting mission had begun with the goal of finding rumoured medical research which may have helped to cure a disease which causes an outbreak of blue boils upon the skin of those infected, as well as leaving them immobile before ultimately succumbing to death. This is also the last known location of the former raiders turned mercs, known as Scab, Charles, Kitty, and Dozer. It's not marked on any known map, but perhaps someday you'll find yourself visiting the location known only as the Vault.